Hello, it's me, Will Webb, with another newsy video about what I've been up to outside of the channel and within the channel and just all over the channel. I know this stuff can get a little boring if it's just me sitting here and talking about it, so here's a quick montage that I prepared. So I went to my first ever festival, Brainchild, to introduce the film Beyond Clueless and also the short film Fish Story by Charlie Line, who's a really interesting filmmaker if you get a chance to look at his stuff. And then like a week later I went for my second ever music festival, Walthamstow Garden Party, and did a load of filming there, including Off the Top of a Cherry Picker, which was super crazy and really fun, and I just had a great time. One of the reasons why this video is going up is because I'm actually really busy this week. I'm at a festival called Cinema Rediscovered in Bristol. You'll be hearing a little bit more about it on the channel next week because I'll have to put up a video about it, which is part of what I'm doing there. Cinema Rediscovered is a festival of like archive and repertory film. They are older movies that are being shown or re-released. So for instance, they're showing Network, Howard's End, and other bigger films like that. I'm going there as part of a Young Film Critics Day called The State of Things, run by a programmer called Tara Judah, and we've got loads of super cool guests, including the aforementioned Charlie Line. So yeah, I'm super pepped about it, but I'm also really busy. When this video goes up, I will probably actually be in like a premiere in Bristol somewhere. I've also begun actually working on director profiles, which I think I talked about in another update before. So here's my like stack of Blu-rays and DVDs for Wes Anderson and David Fincher. I got those recommendations through Google Trends basically, so if you have a director you think there should be more people talking about online, please let me know in the comments down below. But enough about me and what I've been doing. I know what you want to see. What are the other films and TV shows that I've been watching and I haven't had time to review? Here's my movie update for June and July. Lucid Dream. This is a Netflix original drama where I'm pretty sure Netflix did nothing but buy it and then show it. It's a Korean sci-fi drama thriller mix about a guy whose kid goes missing, and then he uses new technology to get inside his memories and try and find out different stuff about the day he went missing to find the kid and get him back. It wasn't phenomenal, it had some interesting ideas in it, but it was suffering from a real mixed purpose. I just didn't understand what the movie was trying to do, whether it was a proper sci-fi or whether it was more like a thriller, and ultimately it didn't really manage to do either. The Good, the Bad, the Weird is basically a Korean action remake of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and I thought it was really cool. It's kind of amazing some of the action sequences that they have in this film, and it's sort of a reminder that the true blockbuster is actually a global phenomenon, and it's one that people can relate to from around the world. But it should have a local flavour to it, and this one has a very specific subtext about Japanese occupation and what was happening in the 1930s in Manchuria. Girlfriend's Day is another Netflix original. I pretty much just sought it out because I like Bob Odenkirk and I want to find out more about what he's doing. Unfortunately, this film was pretty disappointing for me. The real issue with the movie is that it feels like an idea that would fill a sketch, and maybe like a slightly longer sketch than usual, but is not for a feature film. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. This is a total, complete mess of a film. I did not enjoy it in any recognisable sense. It basically feels like it was designed to be a trilogy, and then we got just like a single film Cliff Notes version of that. And even then, I think those planned 3 films still would have sucked. So I'm almost like, well, fair play, at least you didn't make me sit through 6 hours of this. It's only 2.5. There's some sort of interesting stuff done with Arthurian mythology here. I think the idea of a Guy Ritchie hardman King Arthur film is quite interesting just as a concept. This is not what I wanted from that. Definitely give it a miss. My Cousin Rachel is an adaptation of a Daphne du Maurier story. It's got Rachel Weisz in it and she's super good. She is the titular cousin Rachel. But the other actors in it, Sam Claflin, do really good performances as well. It's basically a straight adaptation of the story that carries the tone correctly, and you can't really say that much more about it. I feel like it's a movie that I will recommend to an older relative at some point. Book of Henry. This is the next film from Jurassic World director Colin Trevorrow. I saw the trailer and I liked the look of it enough that it piqued my interest enough to actually go and sit down in the cinema and watch it, a decision that I quickly came to regret. The film is completely tonally mismatched. It really has absolutely no idea what it's doing in terms of the comedy or the drama aspects of it. Everything that was good about how realistic the kids in Jurassic World felt has completely fallen away, and the performances of the children in this are terrible. There's just very, very little to recommend about the film. We've got a little problem in the industry at the moment, I think, where a director will do one good indie film and then they'll just be thrust into this mainstream blockbuster kind of scenario where they have to direct something big. It can really screw otherwise interesting directors like Josh Trank, who completely fell apart with Fantastic Four. Colin Trevorrow actually managed to do it with Jurassic World, though apparently it wasn't that happy a work environment, and I wasn't mad about the movie. But this just goes to show why becoming that big that quickly actually can give you a lot more problems than you can maybe deal with. Ultimately with this film, it could have done with a lot more development, and maybe just with someone saying, no, don't do that, that's a really bad idea. All Eyez on Me. This is the Tupac biopic that is so stunningly inaccurate that there's a meme about him using an iPhone in it. It had a really poor production value, it felt very generic in how it was edited. For instance, they almost always start a scene with a wide, and more often than not it'll be like an exterior wide, an establishing shot, and often that will just be stock footage, often gathered from totally different sources. You get like videotape, you get like TV cameras, you get like film camera, you get like Super 16 and stuff, and it's completely incoherent in terms of how it looks overall. It's also 2.5 hours long, which is like unforgivably long for a film that doesn't really give you any more idea about the person it's about than you would get just from reading their Wikipedia article. There's no clear vision, it's got a bad script, it's got bad performances, it's just not a good movie. Manos, The Hands of Fate. This is like a classic bad film. Apparently Quentin Tarantino has an actual film print of it. I saw it in the Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode, and I gotta say I had a great time watching that, but the film itself looks completely awful. Definitely watch the episode, not the movie. It has this weird sort of energy behind it where it's obviously just somebody's dream, but it's also turning into a nightmare rapidly, and it's just it's just unwatchably poor. If you didn't have the Mystery Science Theater 3000 guys helping out, it would be impossible to get through that movie. Aries. This is another Netflix original, and obviously by this point in the video you'll notice that I've started to get low expectations for what their original movies are like. A lot of them are pretty poor, and Netflix is adding its name to some stuff that's relatively low budget and not that well made, just because they want to get more content for their platform and they can give it distribution. Aries was an exception to that. I actually really enjoyed it. It's a French dystopian sci-fi, it's proper cyberpunk, and it really works at building the world that it's in to make it feel real, but then also making that world small and just having a couple of characters whose relationships are easily understandable and working off that basis. Look Who's Back. Basically the idea is, what if Hitler just suddenly came back to life, was suddenly found on the ground near the bunker where he died, and what would happen to him in modern day Germany? The answer is he becomes basically a media celebrity. The interesting thing about the film is that a lot of the scenes are done with only 2 actors in them, and everyone else are real people who think that there's a documentary being filmed, and they just never bring up the idea this guy is Hitler, he just happens to look like him and think like him. And so what you get are these really subversive scenes where he's talking to actual neo-Nazis and people on the street who back Hitler policies. Some of the non-real stuff feels very stagey and sort of like over the top and silly, but I think the idea behind the film is so interesting that it carries it beyond that, and I think it's a pretty thought-provoking movie overall, so definitely worth a watch. Ex Machina. I keep being recommended this film, and I'd kind of held off watching it because I felt quite overhyped. It was the kind of thing you see a lot of people posting GIFs of on Tumblr and Reddit, and people being like, wow, let's analyze every scene in this film. I think it was a really, really good film. It's got a deliberate pace to it, which I liked. It's sort of slow, and it knows that, and it wants to be, and it wants you to enjoy that and understand that about it. It's got great performances from its 3 leads, and it has a really strong visual aesthetic that's really easily identifiable. When I was a teenager, I used to read a lot of my dad's sci-fi books, and he had a lot of like short story anthologies, and I love that kind of writing, that kind of like Nebula winner short story. And ultimately this feels like that, and I mean that in a good way. It's like one idea that's carried through to completion. Vote of confidence in Ex Machina there. Mr. Deeds. This film is so like incredibly simple that it's literally simple down to like the visuals. At one point they get a fax where Deeds is. It's just like 3 massive different fonts on one page saying Longfellow Deeds, Mandrake Falls. It's the most simple sort of visual exposition, and you know, you can't hate that, but it does definitely tell you the market that it thinks it's aiming for. It's the kind of movie where 30 minutes in, a big fat guy gets pushed down onto a table and breaks it and then goes, I think I shat myself. But it's really an Adam Sandler film through and through, and they're kind of easy to dick on, so I'm just gonna move on. I will say there was one thing that made me laugh, which was that he goes into a house that's on fire at one point, and there's like a box of Special K in the background on a side table, and that's on fire, and I think that's a really funny visual joke. Jared Harris, good for you for being in Mr. Deeds, because that joke, that single one joke in that 90-minute film that I watched was funny. Before I Wake. This is a Mike Flanagan movie. You might know him from some really good horrors, including Hush, which I actually gushed about quite a lot for this channel. I like Flanagan, I like his movies. I think they're clever and distinctive. And I hope good things continue to happen to him because this film wasn't particularly good. It's about a little boy who has the power to make his dreams become reality, but he's not doing it on purpose. And because he's a child, he has no real control over it, and then his nightmares start to come true. One of the problems with the film is that all of the marketing for it is basically pitching it as a horror film, and it's not. It's really more like a fantasy, like a modern fantasy film. There's a dreamlike tone to the directing that's interesting and very thematically appropriate, but ultimately the lead actor and the kid actor are bad in this film. They are wooden and their performances are not convincing, which you really need for a fantasy movie. Before I Fall is a young adult teen film with a kind of Groundhog Day twist. It's about this rich, pretty, privileged teenager who finds herself reliving the same day over and over again, where her friends die in a car crash at the end of it. The best thing about the movie is that the director is a woman making a film about young women, and she's come from an independent film background, so the film feels much more grounded and also more visually consistent than it might have done from a shittier director, basically. She takes the themes of the film and runs with it and really makes it slightly more profound than it might have been otherwise. Basically, it turns the Groundhog Day device into a sort of commentary on what it's like to be a teenager, especially when things go well for you, because you end up with this sort of ennui where every day is the same and everything just melts into itself and you're looking for a way to break out. This really reminded me of some classic teen films from the 90s that had sci-fi twists at their centre, stuff like The Faculty, Disturbing Behaviour, and also Ginger Snaps with a more horror angle. The Circle. I made the mistake of having a really long conversation with my brother about this film after seeing it, so I feel like I've run out of stuff to say about it. The director never really establishes a visual identity for it, and it also falls into this sort of trap of, ooh, isn't social media bad? I feel like there's a lot of these movies being made basically by middle-aged people at the moment who don't really get social media or how important it is to the lives of young people. And it's weird because they're the people who invented it. So you've got this like producer type figure, I imagine, always like a fat American dude who smokes cigars, and he's like, I got a daughter and she won't stop sending snaps. What is that? Snaps. Snaps. I don't understand it. She says she wants to be Insta-famous. What is that? Why don't you make a movie about that? Actually, in the end, the film has quite a nuanced take on social media that I liked, but it takes a long time getting there, and I think it lost a lot of my faith by the end. It can't quite decide whether it wants to be a drama or a satire, and that's like I felt a lot with American movies in particular. I don't think satire translates in a great way to their comedy, and a lot of their satires are much darker. The problem with that is that you have to tread a really thin line with it. There are some scenes in this that are really funny, but they're also too over the top to not feel out of place in a darker satire, which I think is what this wants to be. But you know, Tom Hanks, Patton Oswalt, Karen Gillan, and especially Emma Watson just make the movie tick along. Ultimately, it's watchable, and there's nothing particularly incredibly bad about it. There's nothing that stands out either. Four Lions is a movie that's been on my watch list forever. When I very, very early days asked people to give me suggestions for films to watch, that was on the list. I had a list of like 100 films that I was going to watch, and then I was going to stop doing the channel. See ya, that's done. This is the business now, see? The Snapchats. Anyway, I finally sat down to watch Four Lions the other night, and I really enjoyed it. But it was a real fascinating film to watch, not least because it's quite far removed now from the historical context that it's set in, and a lot of what we consider about terrorism has changed. So it's sort of a time capsule for that period, and what's interesting is what has changed and what hasn't. Freddy vs. Jason. I cannot give you a proper reason why I watched this. I guess morbid curiosity in some way. Watching this film is really just like a thankless task. It's charmless, it has no craft, and it is the epitome of what is wrong with the slasher genre. And of course, it made the most money of both of those franchises. There's one scene in this where Kelly Rowland calls Freddy Krueger a homophobic slur, and I think that is pretty much just the most early noughties thing that I can imagine seeing in a film. Scarecrows. This is like a 70s, 80s horror that appeared on Netflix, which has historically not been that good at having that kind of stuff on there. I know this because I love that trash. I live for it. So I got a beer and I sat and watched this movie late at night, and actually it really surpassed my expectations. The central idea of the movie is like typical schlock. It's like a group of commandos have basically done a robbery of the payroll at their military base, killed a couple of people, stolen a cargo plane with the pilot and the pilot's daughter. And then they have a fight amongst themselves, the money goes missing, and they have to go after it. When they get down to the ground, there are these weird scarecrows surrounding this isolated and completely empty cabin, and it rapidly becomes apparent that something is very wrong because these scarecrows start to move. The coolest thing about the movie is that you never get an explanation as to why that's the case. There are these little surreal touches throughout the film, like one of the guys tries to get away in a car and he drives for a while and then it just stops, and when he gets out there's no engine, and there never has been. someone dies apparently and then comes back and then is acting weird, and it turns out that he's been emptied of all of his organs and stuffed with money, like the money from the safe. Horrible, surreal imagery like that, and the really, really good cinematography for the budget. Just combined to make this film much more than the sum of its parts. And I was actually watching it thinking, yeah, this film looks really good. This film actually has a character, a visual character to it. It's very high contrast, it's all set at night, and there's a lot of like textured light. People will often walk through shadows in a scene or be like half lit, only from one side. And it turns out that Peter Deming, who shot the film, also has worked extensively with David Lynch since the film. So he did Lost Highway, which is a very atmospheric looking film, and Mulholland Drive, which is beautiful. He also did Austin Powers and Austin Powers Goldmember, so he's obviously not beholden to the surreal horror genre. Holidays is a horror anthology where each short is based around a major holiday throughout the year. Obviously, as it's an anthology, it's got different casts and crews, so the quality varies quite a lot. Some of them are good, like St. Patrick's Day and Father's Day. Some of them are just okay, like Christmas and New Year's. Some of them are just downright bad. It's a horror anthology, you know what you're gonna get, why not go and give it a watch? And if you don't know about horror anthology, why don't you check out the video that I made about it, helpfully put in a card, probably in the top right. I think that's the top right, isn't it? Yeah, that's the top right. There you go, that's where the card's going to be. While I've been talking, you can give it a click. YouTube Marketing 101 there, folks. That's a little insider tip from Indie Tricks for you. Wow, this is a long list. Okay, almost at the end. Nerve is another film that sort of looks on the surface like it's going to be about social media and how evil it is. It sort of is. It's basically like a young focused thriller about an online game, about theirs that goes wrong. I think it had a number of interesting things about it. Granted, the plot didn't always line up with what was good about the film, but it had a really strong visual style, a couple of amazing set pieces, and it's lucky that its two leads, who are Emma Roberts and Dave Franco, have a lot of charisma, and their chemistry together is great. With them leading the film, they sort of carry it through the rougher patches, and the visuals really give it a bit of a boost. Henry Jukes and Ariel Schulman, who are a directing duo who made it, also made Catfish, and recently you might have seen that the Mega Man movie is going to be probably directed by them. I don't know anything about Mega Man, but I do know that people saying, oh, what are the Catfish guys doing making this Mega Man film, should go and watch Nerve, because having seen it, I think they can definitely do action. 3 TV shows for you that I've been watching. The Last Man on Earth, which is from the writers of 21 Jump Street and the Lego Movie, is basically what it says in the tin. Will Forte plays a guy who's literally the last person alive until it turns out that he isn't. And it's a comedy that is basically constantly about how awful a person he is. Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, recently landed on Netflix. I've watched the whole thing. I think the strength of the show is that it's not a punchline comedy, and most of the show is about getting to know the characters, and then the comedy comes through that. It also really isn't afraid of drama, and it does some pretty sad and nasty stuff with its characters, and I think that's great. I think that's good of them to try and reflect something about lived experience in it. Give it a watch, you'll learn a lot about wrestling at the very least. Castlevania is only 4 episodes long. It's like a anime style animation written by Warren Ellis, and I think mostly done by American, like British white people basically. I don't know exactly if I can call that anime then, but it certainly looks a lot like anime. I know nothing about Castlevania apart from what the game looks like and like the idea that it has Dracula in it and stuff. I think this is a really cool show. Whether or not fans will enjoy it, I have no idea, but I really liked the quality of the animation, the voice acting was good, and also I could feel Warren Ellis's influence on the story and the way that it was told. That's it for this update video. Please let me know what you've been watching in the comments down below. I'd love to find out more about what you thought about my opinions about those films as well. Don't forget to click subscribe to get the next video when it comes out, and have a good one. See you later.